The moon was full, casting its ghostly glow over the dark forest. A faint, haunting laugh echoed through the trees. Mufaro's youngest daughter, Ihunanya, stood at the edge of the river, her heart pounding. A face, half human, half monstrous, smiled up at her from the water's surface. Its crooked smile whispered, "Will you be queen, or will you drown?" Sit as we take you on a journey. Subscribe to my channel and turn the notifications bell as we start. Mufaro was a proud farmer with 3 daughters. His eldest, Omosefe, was beautiful but cruel. The second, Eseosa, was clever but full of envy. Only the youngest, Ihunanya, was kind-hearted. Though simple in her desires, she carried an aura that made everyone feel at peace. When news spread that the Oba of Benin sought a bride, excitement swept through the village. The palace messengers declared that the chosen bride would not only marry the Oba, but inherit unimaginable power. On the morning of their departure, an old man appeared in Mufaro's courtyard. "Beware of the forest path," he warned, his milky eyes gleaming. "It chooses who is worthy and punishes the unworthy." Omosefe laughed, brushing him aside. "What nonsense." Eseosa rolled her eyes, but Ihunanya nodded politely and offered him yam to eat. The path to the palace was said to test the heart. The king wanted a bride who could face spirits and challenges without losing her soul. Unknown to the sisters, the tests would reveal their true natures. The forest was alive, whispering, shifting, and watching. Omosefe marched ahead, confident and impatient. Eseosa followed, clutching her mirror. Ihunanya walked last, her heart steady but wary. Omosefe was the first to meet a mysterious woman with a baby strapped to her back. The woman begged, "Please, my child is hungry. Can you spare some food?" Omosefe scoffed. "Do I look like your servant?" She pushed past. Later, Eseosa met the same woman. She pretended to be kind, but gave the child a rotten fruit from the ground. When Ihunanya encountered the woman, she knelt, offering her own meal. "I don't have much, but take this." The woman's face flickered like a dying flame. "Kindness will guide you," she whispered before vanishing. Further along the path, a massive tree blocked the way. Its bark was carved with hundreds of eyes that blinked and rolled. A deep voice rumbled, "To pass, you must answer. What is the worth of a queen?" Omosefe smirked. "A queen's worth is her beauty," she declared. The tree groaned and twisted, letting her pass but leaving her path dark and unsteady. Eseosa said, "A queen's worth is her wealth." The tree let her through, but with branches that scratched and clawed. Ihunanya hesitated before answering. "A queen's worth lies in her heart. A kind queen makes her people strong." The tree opened fully, revealing a golden path for her. At dusk, the sisters reached a river with no visible end. Omosefe saw a boatman and demanded passage. The man grinned, his teeth sharp as daggers. "Pay me with your shadow," he said. Without hesitation, Omosefe agreed. She stepped into the boat and felt her shadow rip from her body. As she crossed, her face grew pale and hollow. Eseosa paid with her voice. When she stepped out on the other side, she could no longer speak, though her envy burned brighter than ever. Ihunanya approached cautiously. The boatman laughed. "And you? What will you give me?" "I have nothing but myself," she said. The boatman stared, then vanished. The river parted, and she walked across on a bridge of light. At last, the sisters reached the Oba's palace, a towering structure that seemed alive, shifting and shimmering under the moonlight. Inside, the tests grew darker. Omosefe was lured by mirrors that praised her beauty, but they soon cracked, revealing her ugliness within. She screamed, but no one could hear. Eseosa found herself surrounded by treasures, but every piece burned her hands. Her greed consumed her, leaving her clutching ashes. Ihunanya faced a single door. Behind it was the crooked smile from the river. The face whispered, "Will you take power if it means losing your soul?" Ihunanya knelt before the face and said, "Power without purpose is nothing. I seek only to do what is right." The face laughed, shifting into the Oba himself. "You have passed every test, Ihunanya. You are worthy to be queen." Her sisters, now shadows of their former selves, were banished from the palace. Ihunanya, though reluctant, accepted her role, vowing to rule with kindness. It is said that Ihunanya became the most beloved queen in Edo history. Her reign brought peace and prosperity, but the forest path remains. Travelers whisper that it still tests the hearts of those who dare to walk it, and the crooked smile of the river spirit watches all. Omosefe stood in the palace hall, staring at her faint reflection in a gilded mirror. She touched her face. Her beauty was there, but it was hollow. Without her shadow, her movements felt detached, her thoughts muddled. She hadn't noticed before, but whispers followed her, rising and falling like ghostly chants. "Do you hear that?" she asked Eseosa, who sat silently, her lips unable to move. Eseosa nodded. She too was haunted by treasures she could no longer hold. Every time she reached for anything, her hands passed through, as if she were a spirit. The palace seemed to mock them. Its walls shimmered with faces, and its floors seemed to shift like rippling water. "Why is it so cold?" Omosefe whispered, though the air was warm. Meanwhile, Ihunanya was led down a hallway lit by glowing orbs. The guide was silent, cloaked in golden robes that seemed to breathe with every step. "Where are you taking me?" she asked. The figure turned, revealing a face that was blank. No eyes, no nose, just smooth skin. It raised a hand, pointing ahead. The hall opened into a garden, lush and glowing with flowers that whispered her name. Each petal seemed to hum with life, but in the center was a dark well. As Ihunanya approached, the flower's whispers turned to warnings. "Do not look into the well," but the pull was irresistible. She leaned over, peering into the dark water, and gasped. In the reflection, she saw herself, not as she was, but older, weary, and wearing a crown. Her face was streaked with tears, her hands bloody. "This is the price," a voice whispered from the depths. Ihunanya stumbled back, her heart racing. The guide was gone, and the garden had grown silent. The crown on her reflection's head shimmered briefly in the moonlight, then vanished. "Am I destined to suffer?" she whispered. A bird, golden and small, landed on her shoulder. "The crown does not bring suffering, child. It reveals it. What you see are the choices you must make." "Choices?" she asked, but the bird flew away, leaving her alone once more. Omosefe and Eseosa wandered the palace, each drawn by a strange sound, a low hum that vibrated through their bones. They came to a massive door etched with ancient carvings. "Do you feel that?" Omosefe asked. Eseosa nodded, her hands trembling as she reached for the door. It swung open with a groan, revealing a chamber filled with gold and jewels. In the center was a throne, and on it sat a shadowy figure. "Welcome," it said, its voice like cracking ice. "You seek power, don't you?" Omosefe stepped forward, her greed overcoming her fear. "Yes, I deserve it more than anyone," the figure chuckled. "Then take it." She reached for the throne, but as soon as her hand touched it, the gold turned to black sludge, crawling up her arm. She screamed, but the sludge covered her entirely, pulling her into the shadows. Eseosa tried to run, but the chamber shifted, the walls closing in. The figure's voice followed her. "You wanted everything. Now you will have nothing." Ihunanya was brought to the king's court, but the throne was empty. Instead, the crooked smile from the river appeared again, floating above the room. "You passed the tests, but do you truly think yourself worthy?" it asked. "I don't seek worthiness," she said. "I only wish to do what is right." The smile twisted, growing larger until it became a gaping maw. "What is right? Is it to spare those who would harm you? To rule with mercy, even when others demand blood?" "I don't know," she admitted, tears in her eyes. The smile roared with laughter. "A queen who admits doubt? Perhaps you are worthy after all." The Oba appeared at last, stepping from the shadows. His presence was commanding, his eyes ancient and piercing. "You have done well, Ihunanya," he said. "But there is one final choice. Your sisters are trapped within the palace, victims of their own hearts. Will you save them, knowing they would not do the same for you?" Ihunanya hesitated. Omosefe had tormented her since they were children, and Eseosa had mocked her kindness, but deep down she still loved them. "I will save them," she said at last. The Oba nodded. "Very well." With a wave of his hand, the palace shuddered. The walls rippled like water, and her sisters appeared, gasping and trembling. They were alive, but changed. Omosefe's beauty was gone, replaced with a shadowy, ghostly form. Eseosa's hands were empty, her eyes hollow. Despite their resentment, Ihunanya embraced her sisters, promising to help them find their way again. The Oba placed a crown on her head, but it was light, almost weightless. "Your heart is your strength," he said. "Rule with it, and you will not falter." As she ascended the throne, the crooked smile appeared one last time, watching from the shadows. It whispered, "We will meet again, little queen." Years passed, and Ihunanya ruled wisely, her reign bringing peace to the kingdom. Her sisters eventually found redemption, helping to serve the people in their own ways. But the forest path remained, and travelers whispered of its strange tests. Some claimed to see a queen walking its trails at night, her crown glowing in the moonlight, her eyes filled with both sorrow and hope. And the river spirit's crooked smile? It still lingers, waiting for the next soul to test. Omosefe and Eseosa struggled to adjust to their new lives. Omosefe, once radiant and commanding, could no longer bear to see her reflection. Every mirror in the palace shattered when she stood before it, as though the glass itself rejected her. "I don't belong here," she muttered one evening, her voice low and bitter. "I should have been queen." Ihunanya visited her sister's chamber that night. "You are still my sister, Omosefe. You can find a new purpose here." Omosefe turned away. "How can you forgive me so easily? You must think me weak." "It's not weakness to change," Ihunanya said softly. Eseosa, meanwhile, was consumed by silence. She couldn't speak, but she began to listen, to the cries of the people, to the whispers of the wind, to the hum of life in the palace. She found solace in tending to the gardens, her hands creating beauty where there had once been envy. Despite the peace Ihunanya brought to the kingdom, the crooked smile lingered in her dreams. It spoke of choices yet to come, of dangers lurking in the shadows. One night, as she walked the palace halls, she found herself drawn to a hidden door she had never seen before. It opened silently, revealing a dark corridor lined with glowing etchings, faces, symbols, and strange writings. The crooked smile appeared at the far end. "Still so curious, little queen? What do you want from me?" Ihunanya demanded, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. "Not all choices are yours to make," it said, "but the hardest ones will always find you." Before she could reply, the smile faded, and the corridor collapsed into nothingness. Ruling the kingdom was not without its challenges. Ihunanya faced disputes between villages, whispers of rebellion, and even betrayal from those she trusted. But her kindness was not mistaken for weakness. She balanced mercy with justice, often calling on the wisdom of the palace elders. One such elder, a woman named Eseosa, became her closest advisor. Eseosa had walked the forest path as a girl and survived, though the trials had left her with a silver streak in her hair and a voice that trembled with age-old secrets. "Beware the river spirit," Eseosa warned one day. "It is drawn to rulers, to those who bear the weight of many lives. It will test you again." Ihunanya nodded, though a shiver ran down her spine. Years later, the kingdom celebrated Ihunanya's 10th year as queen with a grand festival. Lanterns filled the night sky, music echoed through the streets, and the people danced in joy. Amidst the celebration, a stranger arrived, a woman cloaked in black, her face hidden beneath a hood. She moved through the crowd unnoticed until she reached the palace gates. "I seek the queen," she said to the guards, her voice smooth and commanding. When Ihunanya greeted her, the woman pulled back her hood, revealing a face Ihunanya recognized instantly. It was the woman from the river, the one with the baby strapped to her back. The woman's eyes glimmered like the surface of a dark lake. "You were kind to me once, queen. But kindness is not enough to protect your people. What do you mean? Ihunanya asked. Your kingdom faces a storm, the woman said. A storm that kindness alone cannot withstand. Will you make the hard choices, even if they break your heart? Before Ihunanya could answer, the woman dissolved into mist, leaving behind a single black stone. It pulsed with a faint light, as though alive. Eseosa examined the stone in silence, her expression grave. This is no ordinary gift, she said. It holds power, but power always comes with a price. The stone began to influence Ihunanya's dreams. It showed her visions of fire and chaos, of her people suffering while she stood helpless. It whispered of strength, of the ability to control fate itself. But Ihunanya hesitated. If power requires sacrifice, whose sacrifice will it be? Omosefe, drawn by the stone's energy, found it one night in Ihunanya's chambers. She touched it, and a voice filled her mind. You could be queen again. Take the stone, and the kingdom will be yours. She hesitated, remembering the black sludge that had consumed her in the palace's hidden chamber. But her ambition burned brighter than her fear. When Ihunanya found her, the stone glowed fiercely in Omosefe's hands. What are you doing? Ihunanya demanded. Omosefe's eyes filled with tears. I just want to feel whole again. You can't take shortcuts to redemption, Ihunanya said, gently prying the stone from her sister's grasp. That night, the crooked smile appeared again, this time in Ihunanya's waking world. It hovered above the stone, its teeth gleaming like polished ivory. You can't keep running from choices, little queen, it hissed. The stone demands an answer. What answer? Ihunanya asked. To use it or to destroy it. Either way, someone will pay the price. As storms began to gather over the kingdom, Ihunanya gathered her people in the palace courtyard. She held the stone aloft, its light piercing the dark clouds. I will not let fear rule us, she declared. The stone grew hotter in her hand, its whispers turning into a deafening roar. Visions flashed before her eyes, her sisters, her people, her future. With a cry, she hurled the stone into the air. It exploded in a burst of light, scattering across the land like falling stars. The crooked smile appeared one last time, faint and fading. You've made your choice, Queen. But remember, power never disappears. It only changes hands. With the stone's destruction, the storm dissipated, and the land began to heal. Ihunanya's reign continued, her wisdom growing with each passing year. Her sisters, though marked by their past, found purpose in serving the kingdom. The legend of the forest path, the river spirit, and the crooked smile endured, a reminder that true strength lies in the heart, and that every choice has its cost. And somewhere, in the depths of the forest, the crooked smile waits for another to test. Subscribe to my channel and don't forget to hit the like and notifications button for more folktales stories.